The Miami Dolphins finished the 2023 regular season with an 11-6 record and made the playoffs for the second consecutive year. They would go on to lose to the Kansas City Chiefs in the wild card round with a score of 26-7 in one of the coldest games in NFL history. Even though they made the playoffs for the second time in 2 years under head coach Mike McDaniel, this was a very disappointing season for them. This team started out 9-3 and in those first 12 games put up 30 or more points in 7 of those games. They would put up 30 or more just once in the remaining 5 games and go 2-3 during this span before putting up just 7 in their playoff loss to Kansas City. The big question for the Dolphins this offseason is simple. What's next? What do they do moving forward? And how do they take that next step? These are all the questions we're going to try and answer in today's video, but it's not easy. In fact, I don't envy the position they're in as a franchise because this situation is very complicated. As you can imagine, there is a lot to dive into in today's video. Now let's begin. We are starting today's video by addressing the elephant in the room with the Miami Dolphins, and that's their record against good teams. They started 3-0 in 2023 with wins over the Chargers, Patriots, and Broncos, who would go on to start the year with a 1-5 record, Denver that is, before flipping the script and eventually finishing the year with an 8-9 record. They would go to Buffalo in Week 4, the future AFC East champion Buffalo Bills, where they would go on to lose by a score of 48-20. This loss at the time was substantial because this was after a few games in which the Dolphins were building a lot of hype, and there was a lot of noise around this team because they put up 130 points in their first 3 games. They put up over 530 yards of offense in 2 of their first 3 games. In typical Dolphins fashion over the past few years, they would get humbled when they played a good team. It's one thing to go to Buffalo and lose 24-21 in a game that's hard fought and goes down to the wire and Josh Allen makes Josh Allen plays. It's another to get sent back to South Florida with your tail between your legs because you got beat by 28 points. Their next 2 games were against the Giants and Panthers, teams that would finish with top 6 spots in the 2024 NFL Draft, and what do you know? The Dolphins would crank it back up and beat both teams by double digits, and in these 2 games would beat them by a combined score of 73-37. Their next test against a playoff team would be against the Eagles in Week 7, in which they would lose by 2 touchdowns on Sunday night with a score of 31-17. We can do this for really the entire season, but you get the point. The lone game they would win against a playoff team would be against the Cowboys in Week 16 with a score of 22-20. There were a lot of things that didn't go Miami's way down the stretch of the 2023 season, and it would be ignorant to not mention that they didn't have their top 2 pass rushers in a playoff game against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb. But I don't think not having those guys played any role in the outcome of this game. Sure, you can make the case that maybe Kansas City doesn't get a final touchdown, but the Dolphins only putting up 7 points against Kansas City was never going to win them this game. The Dolphins putting up just 40 points in the final 3 games they played, which were against the Ravens, Bills, and Chiefs, is very telling. This is a big reason why I don't know what the Dolphins' next step as a franchise is. This is a big reason why it's so hard to win in the AFC. Miami has done a lot of things right over the past few years, and despite the keyboard warriors getting their jokes in about the Dolphins not beating good teams and how they'll never win anything of note and everything along these lines, Miami has went about the rebuilding process the correct way. They needed to get Tua another weapon entering 2022 as Jalen Waddle wasn't going to be enough by himself, so they went out and got him Tyreek Hill, and all Tyreek has done in his first 2 years as a Dolphin is go for back-to-back 119 reception, 1,700 plus yard seasons along with 20 total touchdowns. They needed another running back behind or to pair with Raheem Mostert, and they did exactly that by bringing in Texas A&M's Devon Achane. Achane would go on to have nearly 1,000 total yards of offense, as he would have 997 total yards to be exact, along with 11 total touchdowns in his rookie year. For all the crap Miami gets with the beating good teams thing, they had 3 players with 11 or more touchdowns this year in Achane, Tyreek Hill, and of course Raheem Mostert. They finished second in points per game offensively, and obviously putting 70 in one game will heavily skew that number, but even taking that game out, the Dolphins still averaged over 26.5 points per game, which would have had them finish 6th in 2023. Nobody would deny that when the Dolphins' offense is clicking, they are one of the best in all of football. But, and here's the big but, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things if you put up 42 against the then winless Panthers in Week 6 and Tyreek goes for 163 and a score. What matters is how the Dolphins season ended and who they lost to in the final few games of the year, and also in the manner they lost in the final few games of the year. Playing at M&T Bank Stadium is hard for anybody to go in and beat the Ravens, especially with the success they've had this year. But when you're the media-dubbed greatest show on surf, putting up just 19 points is a tough look no matter how you slice it. Putting up 14 points at home against the Bills in Week 18 with the division on the line in what is effectively a playoff game is another tough look. Not only that, but Buffalo could have and should have won that game by more than 7 points. Buffalo absolutely dominated that game and they ran for over 125 yards as a team and controlled the ball for over 38 minutes of the game. When I was watching the Week 18 game against the Bills, I thought it was Buffalo's game to lose as they would outgame Miami by nearly 200 yards. It was much of the same in the wildcard round, and not only was it bad for Miami against the Chiefs, but one thing I couldn't get behind in the Chiefs game was how much they were throwing the football and, at times, how unnecessary it was. There was a point in the second quarter that I thought was a clear turning point for Miami, and it was when they had 3rd and 2 on Kansas City's 44-yard line. They chose to pass the ball twice, and I'm not opposed to passing the ball twice with Tyreek and Waddle if you're playing in Miami on Sunday at 1 o'clock when it's presumably 85 and sunny. However, in a game with a wind chill of minus 27 on the road, I am, and I oppose to this in a big way. I absolutely love everything Mike McDaniel has brought to this team, from his energy, from his creativity and innovation as a play caller, but this was a time where I truly thought to myself, guys, what are they doing? Kansas City would go 3 and out, and after they stopped Miami, Miami would go 3 and out before Kansas City would go on to kick a field goal to make it 16-7 before half. The scenario leading up to the back-to-back passes was frustrating because Miami had 4 carries for 21 yards on the drive, including 2 6+ yard runs from Raheem Mostert. Once Miami was down by double digits in the second half with the season on the line, well, there's not much the Dolphins or anyone else could have done in that scenario. You have to pass to try to get back in the game. But the back-to-back passing situation in a game where Tua, understandably, wasn't on because of the extreme weather conditions was huge. Ultimately, I think this was an example of trying to be too smart or too cute for the situation, and it backfired in a big way. It should be noted, I don't think the Dolphins were ever going to win this game, but I thought that decision played a huge part in the reason why they lost. They had some momentum going and openly chose to take what was working away. The media narratives for players, coaches, and teams can be downright frustrating, and the Dolphins have certainly heard things like this over the past few years. Whether it's they can't play in the cold, and the record would suggest that, or that they're frauds, or just wait and they'll beat themselves, or anything like this. But one thing that will be discussed entering the 2024 season that genuinely stinks for the Dolphins and head coach Mike McDaniel is they'll point to his 0-2 playoff record in his first 2 seasons as the head coach of the Dolphins. Mike's first 2 playoff games as the head coach of the Dolphins were a trip to Western New York to play Buffalo, with Skylar Thompson starting at quarterback, and a trip to play the defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs in a game where the wind chill was almost 30 degrees below zero. The Dolphins have several great players on their team, but when you run into these situations, there's simply not many teams that would have won either of these games. I don't know how you try and block out the inevitable noise that will be screaming at them all throughout the 2024 season when they play the Bills next year, or when they play any other playoff team for that matter. Not only that, but there's going to be a big conversation this offseason, and it's going to revolve around quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. I know a lot of people were posting the Wikipedia screenshot of the Dolphins drafting Tua at 5 and the Chargers drafting Herbert at 6 during the loss to Kansas City, but we're entering the 5th and final year of Tua's rookie deal, and this team has not won a playoff game since he was drafted. Since Tua has been drafted, the franchise has had a winning record and has not had below 9 wins in a year. Obviously, we know Tua hasn't started every game since the beginning of the 2020 season, but I ask this simple question. What contract do you offer Tua this offseason? He will want to be compensated like fellow 2020 draftees in Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, and soon to be Jordan Love, but Burrow and Herbert's contracts were north of $250 million. Tua is an interesting case because he just led the league in passing yards and finished 5th in passing touchdowns, but Tua does not have the elite arm other quarterbacks in the AFC have. He does not have game-changing athleticism to make up for the fact he can't throw the ball 70 yards. There were times during the Chiefs game where it was frustrating because if Tua has the athleticism other quarterbacks in the league have, they can extend drives and they can open up the playbook more. But when you have not one but two parts of your game that limit what the offense can do, I can't help but think that's going to limit what the franchise is willing to offer. Immediately after playoff losses, there's going to be a lot of takes and a lot of noise from any fan base that loses. It happens, and it's how being a fan of the NFL in today's social media world works. But with how much Mike McDaniel's offense is predicated on speed, I don't think it's too far off to say that Tua, to a degree, limits what this offense can do. There are a lot of layers to this because I don't want to take away everything good Tua did this year, because again, there was a lot of good. But do you think Tua is going to lead an offense into any of the places we saw them play this year with the season on the line and win? Take your pick of whether that's in Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore, or any of the elite AFC teams, and ask if you think Tua is putting the team on his back and winning with the season on the line. They didn't play Cincinnati this year, so I purposely left them out for anyone wondering. But when the Dolphins played the Bills, Chiefs, or Ravens in 2023, which was 5 games by the way, as they played the Bills twice and the Chiefs twice, they scored 74 total points in 5 games. 74. That's an average of 14.8 points per game. You can say what you want about how many guys were hurt on this team defensively down the stretch, which is another conversation that I worry about for their future as well, but 14.8 points per game is not going to cut it against any of these teams. If you were wondering, the Dolphins went 0-5 in these games this year. So now the question becomes, do you extend Tua? If so, what's the deal? Would it be a Geno Smith type contract, and would Tua even be interested in signing a deal like that, knowing he, again, led the NFL in passing yards and finished 5th in passing touchdowns? Due to all of these factors, I don't envy the position the Dolphins are in. They're obviously better than the bottom feeder teams of the NFL, everyone knows that, and the points they put up against those teams show that. But they're now in a position where they have to take the next step in the vaunted AFC, and it's a hell of a lot harder to go from good to great than it is to go from bad to good in today's NFL. I also worry about the future of Jalen Phillips, who suffered a torn Achilles on Black Friday, and Bradley Chubb, who suffered a torn ACL on New Year's Eve. These aren't tweaks that will be okay in 6 weeks, a couple weeks after the season ends. These are major injuries, and even entering the 2024 season, it's reasonable to ask, how much time are these guys going to miss? Entering the 2024 season, the Dolphins will have a decision to make on paying their quarterback, and they have to face the very real possibility of their top 2 pass rushers missing time to start next year. Tyreek Hill will also be 30 years old, and given the nature of his game is based not only on speed, but his insane acceleration and agility, that starts to become a conversation. Not a full-blown panic, of course, but a conversation. I wouldn't be worried about the Dolphins' future if their offense played better down the stretch and better against great teams, but they didn't, and that's a big reason why I worry about the future of this team, because the big question that's going to linger for the next few months that they're going to have to answer is pretty simple. What's next? I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 34% of people watching are subscribed, and it helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.